Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final seminar series edition of the year. Fernanda Rosa speaking. We also have Christine Labuski in the room, and Louis, who also supported the whole semester with our arrangements and all what is necessary for this to happen. So I'd like everyone to thank all these people who helped the full year. But for this specific seminar, which has started some hours earlier with a workshop, we had many more than just 6 hands. You also had the help and the collaboration of these 3 amazing scholars who accepted to be here in this very cold weather, traveling from different states to share their knowledge and their experience on disability studies, on disability justice, and I hope we learn a lot with them. And we feel very comfortable to share our doubts, to share what is in here that needs to be brought out for us to learn more about this as an intersection in an intersection with the studies we do ourselves. So the name of the panel and the event that we algorithm-based technologies disrupt our normal narratives about democracy and free exchange. The emergence of these technologies is not predestined or an inevitable conclusion to our projects as human beings, though they are often presented as so by those who benefit from their adoption and use. This panel takes on the challenges that such technologies mean for the inclusion of disabled people. Along with other social groups usually absent in the design and development of AI, disabled people are among the first casualties of technological adoption. Technologies rarely account for disabled lived experiences, knowledge, and community. In this panel, Ashley Shew will be hosting the Just Tech Fellow Jess Matthews and the User Experience Design Scholar Rua Williams in an engaging event, as we are going to see here. I'd like to thank a lot our sponsors for this event. I will name them here. So this has been organized by the STS department with the great support of Just Tech Fellowship, Disco Tech, the College of Liberal Arts and Human Science, the Center for Humanities in our college, Aspect Program, Bia Yala Pluriversity, and Plus Policy Network. So I will introduce our 3 speakers here, starting with Dr. Shew, who is from our department and is an associate professor of STS. Her current research sits at the intersection of technology studies, biotech ethics, and disability studies. Among the many projects that she co-leads, she is the principal investigator of an Andrew Mellon Foundation-funded higher learning project that supports the creation of a regional disability community technology or Disco Tech Center, providing guidance for developing disabled-led technology and disability-forward technological futures through humanities-based scholarship in disability justice education, arts, and outreach. We have, actually, Dr. Shew is also the author of this award-winning book, Against Techno-Ableism, Rethinking Who Needs Improvement. I also introduce Jess Matthews, who is the founder and chief good troublemaker at Backbone Digital Leaders, a digital marketing and organizers and voters, an adjunct professor at NYU and digital coach with the National Democratic Training Committee and Arena Academy. Jess' expertise comes from her leadership on several presidential and down-ballot campaigns, as well as in industries from tech to state and local government. Her activism has always empowered underestimated leaders to claim their seat at the table. She lives in Wake Forest, North Carolina, with her husband, 2 children, and her mom is here too today. Thank you for coming. We have Rua Williams. So Dr. Williams is an assistant professor in user experience design at Purdue University and PI of the Co-Liberation Lab. As a former Just Tech Fellow, Dr. Williams' work explores how disabled people imagine and build their own social technical worlds, often in spite of and orthogonal to existing structures of bias, stigma, and inclusion. They also investigate how issues in technology policy and research practice interact to disrupt disabled people's bodily autonomy and access to meaningful public life. They regularly publish on AI impacts on disabled people. Their book, Disabling Intelligences, is coming out next year from Palgrave Macmillan Press. So without further ado, I will say something else before passing the word. As today is the last seminar series of the year, we are going to recognize the support we received from many of you throughout the semester. We had people who came here every week to be listening and learning with our amazing speakers. So Louis, Chris, and I decided that we should just give a gift to 2 of you who recognize, who can list or who can identify that you came to 6 seminars or more throughout the semester. We had 11, so we are going to pass a list of all the seminars of this semester. If you see that you came to 6 or more, you are just going to write your name in the paper and place in the small bag. So at the end, we will just pick 2 of you. Thank you to our flight attendant, Dr. Labuski. And then that is the idea. During the speaker's presentation, you are going to see the list of all panels we had during the semester. You have a pen and a piece and very many pieces of paper. If you identify you have come to 6 or more panels, just write down your name and place in the small bag, and we will then, at the end of the day, have the pick 2 of you. After our panel at 3, it ends at 3. After they speak, we have questions and answers. At 3, we still be here together to finish the semester 2. And at 5:30 p.m., we are going to rise in silo if you want to join us. So that's all the announcements I have for today. Thank you so much. Please, Ashley, come. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fernanda, and Christine, and Lois, and Joe in the back there with all the AV. Turn your microphone on. Oh, I have to turn it on? All right. I will start again. Am I mic'd? Is it going? Yep. Everyone's great again. Hi. My work is in philosophy of technology, so when the tech isn't going right, I always have like a little sense of delight, and I know that's the wrong reaction to have in all of these circumstances. So I'm sorry for that. I was just a little, ooh, yay, it didn't work. And we'll find, often technologies do fail a lot of people. And it's not that I think technology is doomed to fail as a project. I like lots of technologies. I'm standing here only because I have a prosthetic leg underneath the shorter of my 2 legs. I am wearing hearing aids. I am ready for a world that I am encountering through and with a lot of technologies, especially as a disabled person. I'm dependent on so many technological systems. Some are more or less trivial than others, right? So when we're having AV issues that we're solving, it's oh, this is going to be solvable. This is reasonable. And I think when we have different layers of technology, sometimes we have stories about disability and technology where because so many of our stories about disability are askew, right? A lot of our stories about disability are hero stories about engineers coming in to save the day with disabled people as objects. Disability is often seen as brokenness, as being inadequate, not as like a different orientation to the world or some sort of more liberatory frame, right? We think about disability often in terms of impairment in a very limited way, but we're all impaired in some ways. I like the words of the cyborg Jillian Weissa, who writes in one of Sai's lovely poems is, "Are you limited?" And the answer is, I do not have wings, right? None of us have all the functions to begin with, right? Our sort of embodiment matters to how we encounter technology, how we encounter the world. And these things are not new, but we have all of these stories about disability that give us a sob story about disability and suggest that technology is going to come in and save the day. We're more critical in other areas of technology. And I don't just say this because I'm in a room full of people who are in STS. We're often, as individuals using technologies, more aware of the ambiguous by the phrase from Melvin J. Kranzberg, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. Right, so it's this idea early on in the history of technology that technologies always have good and bad effects, affect people in different ways. You know, the quote itself kind of downplays the way in which power shapes who gets to use, who gets to own, who gets to be considered an expert about technology. So I'm really excited to be on this panel. I know a lot less about the political end than say, Jess Moore-Matthews here. And I'm not nearly as creative as Rua Williams. I'm excited to have a conversation about technology and disability and democracy and AI with them today. And do write your questions along the way. We each have about 10 minutes of yapping, at which point we'll be asking each other questions, but also then opening the room and the Zoom room to questions, your questions on these topics. So I want to sort of offer a couple slides of groundwork to some of these conversations. So the first is to offer, oh, can I see the slides? Hey. Is that happening now? Oh, it is, good. It's a definition of ableism from T.L. Lewis, one that I really like. Often when we think about ableism, people are like, oh, it's bias against disabled people, right? And sort of like the prevailing opinion that people usually express is that, oh, we should care about disabled people. And ableism can slip behind that in sometimes ways that can jump up and surprise you. Because ableism is sort of at the root of a lot of ways in which we think about bodies, a lot of ways in which we think about people's minds, a lot of ways in which we think about like what we value, who we think is valuable, what we take as important skills, what we take as professionalism and rigor. Hey, we're at a university. So ableism is this system, according to T.L. Lewis, of this definition that gets updated every few years. We're about due for one. This is January 2022. A system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. The systemic oppression that leads to people and society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, health/wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce or produce, excel, or behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. Ableism gets inbuilt to different systems of, say, immigration to the United States. If we're talking about how eugenics was, informed sort of immigration policies. So who we in the United States take as a citizen and take as belonging, but even permitted to come here in the first place is very much shaped by ideas about who we think is good, who we think has the particular skills or productivity, which populations are, say, disease-free, right? Which of course, all humans can acquire diseases. Surprise. This is a public health talk. No, just jump out of that one. There are so many ways in which sort of people are policed based on ideas about disability, appropriate behavior, etc. And this enters into so many aspects of life. I mean, I think about it in terms of K through 12 education. I think of it in terms of elder care, and everywhere in between we might imagine. So when I'm thinking about these systems and technology and these common narratives about design or engineering and disability, we are in a world where disability is always cast as lower, and these narratives are combining in ways with our technological hopefulness in ways that actually can end up in really deadly and terrible ways, in ways that we don't expect or intend, because of whose bodies and minds we initially took as valuable and worth knowing and worth planning for and worth thinking about in the future. This, of course, has deep historical roots. We didn't get here from nowhere. And I've been thinking a lot about, it's not even that new, several decades of scholarship into disability justice movements. Usually when we talk about disability, we talk about disability rights. And the disability justice movement, which is over 20 years old now, speaks against some of the ways in which the disability rights movement hasn't been realized and is impossible for it to be realized, because so much of disability rights is about making disabled people move up to an imagined level in the hierarchy, like, oh, if disabled people just had jobs, then they could be productive and valuable. Oh, if disabled people just had equal access to those jobs, equal access to the education. But we're existing in a system where, of course, particularly for people who are multiply marginalized, you're not going to get the sort of benefits of those particular rights movements. And so I've broken this down just as some of the groundwork for the discussion we're going to have, that disability rights and disability justice are not the same thing. So the disability rights movement takes independence as an important value. You see this in Centers for Independent Living, even how they're named, a movement that started in the 1970s, calls for equality. If disabled people could just be, equal, right? Like, and in some ways, force them to be equal through particular types of programs, or if they can't be equal, I mean, we still have states that allow disabled people to be paid sub-minimum wages for their work, right? That we're literally monetarily not valued equally for particular types of work. Disability justice comes along and says, none of us are actually independent. That was a myth we always told all of ourselves. And in fact, this idea about sort of individual productivity is kind of bankrupt. I mean, even if you're driving to your super capitalist job, you're doing so on public roads, right? And you're doing so with the knowledge that built the car that you paid a lot of money for, and outside of a public transportation system that would serve you better. There's a lot to say about transportation. I don't know that we're going to talk, we could just talk about transportation. That there's all these ways in which we are dependent on one another, even if we're non-disabled, right? And that we should be valuing care for one another rather than sort of an approach that emphasizes sort of either equal access or sort of like equality of conditions. Some people might need more help at some times. Some people might need more like hands-offness at some times, right? Help isn't always like rushing in and touching people. I hope we don't. And so we have disability rights modeled on the Black Civil Rights Movement from the 1960s to currently, and a lot of the tactics that disability rights leaders used were in the same vein. The movement for disability justice is sometimes in reaction to this. Like, this didn't flower in the way we hoped it would. And even when we talk about the disability rights movement, the people we center are often white disabled people, even though Black people have been part of the movement for a long time. And a surprising number of Asian Americans, and I don't say surprising because, whoa, surprising, but like when I think about the disability rights movement, there's like a list of people who played incredible roles in this movement that don't fit into the categories of Black or white very easily either. And of course, Indigenous people in the movement and Latinx people as well. Disability justice is explicit about including Black and brown, and not just including, letting leadership happen where white people aren't constantly centered and where straight people aren't constantly centered. There are these, where will you go here? 10 principles of disability justice from Sins Invalid, which will look eerily familiar if you were in our session just before, but sort of talking about intersectionality as a value to doing disability justice work, leadership of the most impacted. What that looks like in tech research will turn tech research on its head, right? What does it mean to have leadership of the most impacted? Well, Rua Williams has counterventional strategies that if the NSF would fund them at higher rates, they could actually use to show some of the ways in which we could do this in sort of tech development and thinking about things like AI. An anti-capitalist politic where people are valued, of course, recognizing their wholeness, but beyond productivity, not related to their productivity. A commitment to cross-movement organizing. Sustainability individually and collectively. I think about disability organizing as taking turns a lot, right? Because none of us are able to do it all the time. And handing off the work becomes really important for chronically ill people who know that they will have flares and issues in their lives. This relates to cross-disability solidarity and interdependence as part of the movement itself, and a commitment to collective access and collective liberation, leaving no body. And I didn't bore you guys with this set of cases that scare the shit out of me as a disabled person. One where someone's retinal implant goes off and turns off while they are crossing the street. And in fact, the whole line, the Argus 2 line of second site retinal implants, bought them for their deaf children. And the US company that decided to do this as sort of a humanitarian move, 4 years after the implants went in, they're not gonna maintain or support that line of implants anymore, and once they're off. And good luck affording the new implant and surgery, particularly. I'm gonna turn the floor over to Jess Moore-Matthews, who will talk about this in more like policy-driven ways, because I'm just going to go up here for a while. I'm going to go way down here for a while. I have no meso level, and I'm hoping someone will meso me up. Oh yeah, puns. Okay. And I'll take this off.
Wow. I just turned 35, and I'm often like, is this adulthood where I just want to sit here and listen to you all day, but now I have to talk, and I'm like, I wish I could just sit and take notes. And okay, well, my name is Jess Moore-Matthews. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am a brown-skinned woman standing at about 5'4", but wearing these platforms today, so my husband says they make me 5'6". I am wearing green pants and a black turtleneck, and I have my hair down today, and I'm wearing a white mask. So I am super excited to talk to you all. Very honored to be here from Raleigh, North Carolina. And I thought about what I wanted to share today, and there's a couple of things. I'm going to try to model accessibility as I move through this presentation. So a couple of things that you'll notice I'll do is tell you what I'm about to talk about, so that those of you with ADHD or with trouble processing things will know, okay, here's what's coming next, here's what's coming at the end. And I'll do my best to recap what I've shared as well, because that's a great access practice. Using a mic, access practice. And I'm also just going to take my time, if you don't mind. So I've heard we have about 10 to 12 minutes, so I might get quiet. And you might be like, what's going on? It's just because I'm just collecting my thoughts. So these are all access practices, and one thing you'll learn about accessibility is that access benefits all of us. It's not just about doing these things for folks who are what might be considered traditionally disabled, so deaf, blind, maybe have mobility challenges. These things benefit all of us. All of us walk away like, wow, I really remembered what just happened. So first, I'm going to start with a quote. Second, I want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got here, because that's interesting as well, and I'm a storyteller. And then I want to kind of situate that story in the context of a bit of a lesson in the medical model versus the social model of disability. And I think that's where I'll stop. I'm excited for your questions. So the quote that I want to start with is actually from Mariam Kaba. Some of you may be familiar with her. She says, "Let this radicalize you, not lead you to despair." Let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair. Okay? I just finished a book with the same title. I encourage you all to read it. It feels very relevant after the election. She said, "Let this radicalize you and not lead you to despair." So a bit about me. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, but my family is originally from Louisiana, right outside of New Orleans. I'm going to talk about my mom today, who is sitting right there. She can wave. And the reason I'm going to talk about my mom is because a lot of how she lived her life impacted my life. So my mom is the first in our family to go to college. And because she is who she is, she went all the way through and got a PhD. And she decided to do that when I was in elementary school. So imagine me in kindergarten, first grade, seeing my mom decide that she wants to become a psychologist. So I immediately moved from Charlotte to New Orleans and then to Chicago. And as she's writing her dissertation and going through the work of getting a PhD, I'm sitting right beside her with my Babysitter's Club books, right? Kind of watching her go for something that, you know, maybe years before she'd never imagined she'd go for. And so I was always very interested in what she was doing, always a student, but I was particularly interested in politics. So in middle school, I went to a program called the Junior Statesmen of America. I spent a summer at Princeton University. I spent a summer at Northwestern University. And a lot of the folks in that program actually did go on to become actual politicians today. Several of us now work in politics. But I was also student body president at my high school. And so this tells you a little bit about how I was always kind of civically minded. So imagine me, this person who's watched her mom get a PhD, who's gone and done these kind of governmental political camps. I'm now in college, right here in Virginia, Hampton University, closer to the Tidewater area. And I come home for my first summer out of school. I go to see a movie. I've been meaning to look up what the movie could have been because I don't actually remember the details of the movie. But I go with an old friend, and as we're walking out of the movie, I'm like, ugh, I can't get this tingling to go away. I'm like, I've had this tingling in my hands for like the last 2 weeks. And I was like, and it feels like it's spreading up my arms. And I can't figure out what it is. And he's like, okay, that's weird. And we keep talking about the movie. So we get to the parking lot, we get to the parking garage, and we're talking, we're catching up. He went to one school, I went to another. And he sees me kind of like stomping my feet. He's like, hey, is that tingling thing happening in your feet too? And I'm like, yeah, this is so annoying. I said, you know, I've always had sensitive skin, and I just tried this lotion, and I bet I'm having an allergic reaction to this lotion. And he's like, weird. And we keep talking. You know, we're 18, so we're just like standing in the parking garage talking. So right before we leave, it's like almost midnight, and he sees me again, just kind of like do this thing that I've now gotten used to doing. He's like, are you still feeling it? I'm like, yeah, it's so annoying. I need to, you know, figure it out. He's like, I think you should tell your parents when you get home. And I'm like, really? Like, I'm telling you, it's probably an allergic reaction. He's like, I think you should probably say something. So I go home. Against my better judgment, I was like, it's not that big of a deal. I actually just go straight to my mom and dad's room and, you know, what's going on? I was like, hey, I'm having this weird tingling sensation. It's like my hands and feet fell asleep. And I was like, and I can't get it to go away. I was like, I've been shaking and stomping, and I just remember my mom like popped up. My dad kept snoring is what I remember. But my mom popped up and was like, let's go to your pediatrician tomorrow. That's how young I was. And so I'm like, tomorrow, really? Is that serious? So we go to the emergency, we go to the pediatrician. I see a doctor who's not mine because my doctor was out. And I remember that he like asked me a couple of questions. He did some weird tests where he like, you know, knocked on my knee to see how my reflexes were. And then he like brushed something on my arms and was asking all these questions. And the whole time I'm just annoyed because I'm like, just give me the cream or whatever it is that you're gonna give me to get this to go away. And he eventually says, I want her to go see the neurologist. And at this point, in my 18-year-old brain, I'm like, he doesn't believe me. He thinks something's wrong. Like, what does my brain have to do with what I'm experiencing? Fast forward 5 days later, on my mom's birthday, which is why I wanted to start the story with her, I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And I remember when my dad came in my room to tell me, I was like, yes, because I finally knew what was wrong. Like I was just tired of the feeling. And I'm like, okay, so now they can give me the cream? And he's like, no, it's not gonna be a cream, you know? And I'm like, okay, well, what are they gonna give me? Can we go pick it up from Walgreens? And that's when I find out that it's something that does not have a cure. It's a chronic illness that I'm gonna have to learn to give myself an injection. Keep in mind, this is 2 weeks before I'm returning to college. And that I, essentially like everything has changed. So I think about technology in that moment a lot because the one good thing that came out of my diagnosis is that Hampton required that you have a doctor's note to get a car on campus. And I remember my doctor was just like, whatever you need, right? Everyone just felt so bad for me. So I was able to drive up to Virginia with my car. And I think about how they taught me how to inject myself with the syringe, but they gave me this thing that looked like a toy to do the injection. Because I was so young, they were just like, no way can you look at a needle and like do this to yourself. Just press this button, it'll go into your leg. And then I remember they connected me with someone virtually, a woman in Wisconsin who was like 60 years old, who was supposed to be my like injection coach. So every day I would call her and she'd be like, okay, try a different spot. How's the spot looking? And I remember she was a huge part of my sophomore year. I never met this woman. I don't even remember her name. But technology really helped me through that first year. Even as I remember the medication stopped working 4 to 5 months later, the tingling came back and I had to switch to a different medication. And so this was my sophomore year of college. A lot happened that year. My grandfather passed away. I was going through so much. I broke up with my boyfriend of 6 years. It was just like a whole new world, right? But as I moved away from that diagnosis, I remember I really leaned on everything my doctor had to say. And this is where I want to talk about the medical versus social model. For the first 5 to 7 years of me having MS, everything about my diagnosis and my illness was between me, my parents, and my doctor. It was all about waiting for a cure. It was all about relieving symptoms. It was all about hiding it from folks if they didn't have to know. Like no one knew that I had MS. And I remember it was just something very private and personal for me. When I left Hampton and went on to NYU to get my master's, I started meeting people who were navigating New York with a disability in a way that was very visible. And I remember I always felt very drawn to these people because they just seemed so independent and bold and just unashamed in a lot of ways about their disability. And while I often hung out with them, I didn't tell them why I was so drawn to them because I don't know that I even fully knew. I started working for the New York City mayor. I was his chief content officer. I'm knee deep in digital marketing for the largest city in the country. And the New York City Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities comes to our office and says, hey, we're hosting this accessibility conference. We want to do it in collaboration with the New York City Mayor's Office creative communications team because we think you all could really help us promote it. The person who's telling me this is blind and deaf, and everyone in their office has a disability. And I immediately say yes and throw myself headfirst into it, but I never told them why I was so interested in everything they had to talk about with accessibility. It's really this group of people, the New York City Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities and everyone who came out of that office, who introduced me to a different way of handling my disability. All of a sudden, it was not about how I could show up as some normative version of myself. It was about what the city of New York could do to make my life there more accessible. It was fascinating to me that they looked at disability not as something that needed to be cured necessarily or changed, but something that needed to be accommodated. So the medical model, which is the traditional model of disability, says that you are the issue. You are the thing that needs to look for a cure. You're the person who needs to lose weight. You're the person who needs to pray for sight if you're blind. You're the person who needs to change. The social model of disability says society needs to change to meet you where you are. And that is a very modern view of disability that completely radicalized me, to take you back to our original quote. So when I think about how I got to this moment, I think a lot about 2020 and how so many of us who had chronic illnesses felt left behind when every time someone died from COVID, they said, oh, but don't worry, they had a pre-existing condition. Do y'all remember that? Don't worry, they had something else going on. They were overweight. Don't worry, it's not coming for you. Don't worry, they had diabetes. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. If I die from COVID, are they really gonna say, don't worry, she had MS? Like, what about my 2 kids? And what about everyone who make sure candidates all across the country are captioning their videos. We make sure they're adding descriptions to their images. We make sure they're using plain language so that people can understand what they're saying the first time they say it. And we're making sure that folks are prioritizing issues like language justice, allowing people to speak to them and to be spoken to in the language in which they feel most empowered. So that's my story. It has a lot to do with technology and democracy, and I'm pretty sure I'm over my time, but I look forward to all of your questions. Thank you.
Hi. There it is. All right, so as Fernanda introduced me, I am Rua Williams, and I am the principal investigator of the Co-Liberation Lab, and I take that name from the 10th principle of disability justice for collective liberation. My research is in disability, technology, and politics. And when I say politics, I mean the broader sense, not party politics. But I'll also be transitioning to saying policy, as we all need to start changing our words so that we can stay safe from fascism. What I'm going to do today is is a little bit an aside, right? And so it's very focused on artificial intelligence and democracy. Whereas if you would like to know more about my work on disability and technology, then I encourage you to Google meta-eugenics, which is a banger in my opinion. And if you want to learn more about artificial intelligence and disability, then I encourage you to look up On Being an Outlier, or Oh No, Not Another Trolley. Or if you want to read about disability and COVID and public policy, you can look at Only the Old and Sick Will Die, which is very related to the story that Jess told us. Today, I'm going to do what I've been referring to as a bit. So if you aren't familiar enough with me to know that the next words that come out of my mouth are definitely satire, I want to prep you. This is satire. Okay, here we go. Here at Artificial Solutions, we pride ourselves on our superior innovations for American consumers. Our latest innovation, My Vote. Artificial Solutions has determined with an 86% accuracy that your social media and e-commerce behavior can be matched to the hottest candidates in your area. No more tiresome research about the issues, looking for the candidate most likely to be the least repulsive. You never have to look into who the candidates are or what they stand for. It's eHarmony for politics. We can deliver a pre-filled ballot directly to your home. With My Vote integration, local governments can automatically process your vote during voter verification. Soon, voter suppression will be a thing of the past. Never again will you struggle to reach remote or obscure polling locations or have your vote thrown away for failing to write cursive correctly. My Vote can automatically process voter registration and verification and automatically classify voter eligibility. Your status as a citizen and patriot can be verified against training data of the online behavior of political dissidents. Let's see it in action. We evaluated your online behavior. Your meme database was used to classify you as queer, depressed, and anti-capitalist. Your online clothing purchases suggest you support gender ideologies. You posted a selfie and a pair of rainbow Doc Martens with the caption, "Come and take it," on January 6, 2021. Your email has been linked to a Mastodon account on a global server of 90,000 users, 5 of which are on a government watch list. Your voter eligibility has been processed according to local and federal government criteria and has been suspended for threats to political harmony. You can appeal for reevaluation in 10 years. Citizens de-verified by My Vote will be placed on governmental remediation lists, fast-tracked for denaturalization, suspended from marriage rights, blacklisted from adoption agencies, and disqualified from public service. You'll wake up one morning, transitioned. From citizen to felon in the wing, barred from campuses lest you groom the children, but the bullets still get in. ShotSpotter will tell us the next tragedy is here. The algorithms will curate our outrage as it crests and slips back into silent, fatalistic complacence. Hush now. You'll never have to vote again. Bye.
That was so much more sinister.
Did we go here?
Yeah, we're supposed to go here.
Oh,
Okay, what's up?
Thank you so much for this vision of the future, this terrible one. But thank you for all these sharings. It's very inspiring. And I invite the room to ask questions or comments or reactions.
Fernando just broke the microphone, everybody.
No, I turned it off.
Oh, you turned it off. Okay. I was watching you with that. I was like, oh no.
I'm good at vacation.
Now we do bite, so I understand your hesitance. Oh, I took off my mic. We do bite. I'm just letting people know. I took a chunk out of the minister's kid when I was 5.
Oh.
I'm still shamed for it, but maybe I don't care anymore. So just know that your questions could be danger. I don't know. Hi.
My name is Andrew Rosenthal.
Oh, where's the mic on? All right. So fun.
Hello.
Hello, my name is Andrew Rosenthal. I'm a second-year master's student in the STS department at Virginia Tech. And I noticed on one of the slides for comparing disability justice and disability rights, it said that one of the characteristics of disability justice was mutual aid. And I'm familiar with mutual aid broadly, but I'm kind of curious what that looks like specifically in relation to disability justice.
Oh, we have our own mics.
Mm-hmm.
Technology is fun. We could talk about PG&E fires. So, an example from recent years is a group of people that organized transport and electricity for people affected by the PG&E fires in California. And so this was disabled people organizing for disabled people. And so they would find people who were affected by brownouts and bring them to a place where they could get the power that they needed to survive. So this is disabled people who rely on equipment that needs power in order to keep them alive. And one of the hashtags they used for organizing was #PowerToLive. And so this is an example. That same organization also developed PPE kits during COVID and delivered masks, hand sanitizer, and sanitizing wipes, and other kinds of prophylaxis to disabled people all over the area that they were stationed in California. And so that's kind of an example of mutual aid is sort of based on that principle of like we keep each other safe.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, another example would be, in general, thinking about how not waiting on state solutions is really central to disability justice. So the idea that bureaucracy and, you know, the idea of a ruling class coming to save each and every one of us has failed time and time again. Something that is really important to disability justice. So in general, I mean, it calls on us to be innovative. It calls on us to be really creative. And it also calls on us to be scrappy in a lot of ways, because creativity and innovation are often a lot easier when you have funding. But in some cases, funding's not there, and you really have to figure out how to use what you have to meet folks where they are. And so, you know, Rua kind of touched on this, but I think back to some of the, you know, uprisings that happened just a few years ago. You know, in a lot of ways, there was so much going on with regard to masking, it being not just a way to keep protesters safe, but also as a way to protect against surveillance. That just, you know, masks people don't think of it as a technology, but it really functioned as a technology in that way during that time. And it was something that disabled people really pushed for and led the way on as it relates to how to show up in that moment, you know, for Eric Garner, for everyone who was being killed by state violence, how to show up in a way that was keeping everyone safe and also modeling what solidarity could look like. And so, you know, that's something that I think I'm really inspired by in the context of your question, is how can we, in a lot of ways, some of the most innovative solutions are often the simplest solutions. I often make fun of my dad because he thinks of these things, and then, like, you know, a year later it happens and he's like, oh my gosh, I just thought of that, you know? But it's the thing that happens when you're, you know, everyone knows about the stories about Google employees at the cafeteria coming up with Gmail, or, you know, just like, it's the things that happen when we are being creative and trying to think around problems, you know, where those solutions kind of come up, and they often look like mutual aid.
We can talk about masking in the context of AI and democracy also, because what happened was that state power recognized the coalition between people who needed to protect themselves from COVID and activists, and they used that story as a way to bar effective access to the essential prophylaxis, masks. And the reason that they did this was because the existing facial detection systems that are embedded within policing in the United States were ineffective with the masks on, right? Yeah. So you have this undermining of collective care because of the affinities that exist between disability and revolution.
Yeah, I mean, think about how masks were politicized, and also how, you know, I remember in 2020 when I couldn't actually open my phone with my mask on. I was like, oh, gotta, you know, and now actually I can. You know, think about how technology's caught up in those ways.
Which means that they can recognize you with the mask on.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I also think about when we leave planning to other people or governmental bodies as disabled people, they're just going to leave us to die. And I feel like that sounds like I'm saying something hyperbolic. I read disability memoir. I tricked the National Science Foundation famously into paying a group of people to read disability memoir and like process it about technology. I think they knew what they were paying for. I like to be hyperbolic in other ways, but you know, reading so many accounts of disabled adults thinking about their childhood, one of the more demoralizing facets of reading disability memoir was encountering all of these narratives where over and over disabled adults are reflecting on a disabled childhood and the day in elementary school when they realized that the plan for them in an emergency situation was to leave them to die. Right, so all of these areas and buildings where if you're a wheelchair user, you got to wait in this area. Or if you're someone who's blind, wait over here. And someone, what's the plan? Will come get you. I think about the ways in which immediate elevator shutoffs are actually not that great when we have very large buildings and maybe the hazard isn't anywhere near there and people, could escape. Like I think, when we're talking about not just mutual aid, but thinking about planning of the structures that we need for the future, a lot of disability testimony is really relevant to the holes that exist in our society. This is thinking in cross-disability intersectional ways again, right? But which disability justice would have us do. But a lot of times the plan for disabled people is no plan at all. Right. And so we've had to look out for each other in a much longer sense than people usually have to think about.
Yeah, I haven't seen a published study on it yet, but I'm pretty sure there are statistics out about how when we hear about casualties in a natural disaster, it's people who are often in assisted living facilities, cohabitational, folks who are disabled, folks who had no way out. So while everyone's evacuating from Tampa, there's a group that is literally being left behind because there was no infrastructure to get them out. Same with, right here, the hurricane. So, mutual aid is everything when we think about that.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ralisa Dawkins. I'm a student in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society. Thank you so much for your talk. And I just wanted to ask the question based on all three presenters. First, Ashley Shew, you pointed to the notions of the narratives surrounding people living with disabilities and how those narratives are basically based on assumptions rather than actually having experience with disabled people and to know how they actually engage in society. And then, Jesse, you gave us a personal account of that with your experience. And then, Williams, you came back and gave us this notion of predictive analysis and behavioral profiling. And so, thinking across these three accounts, I want to find out your perspective about the concreteness or susceptibility of disability justice in the wake of this new reality that is approaching. Even though artificial intelligence is upon us, but it's still a burgeoning technology. So based on the notion of this skewed narrative surrounding disability, and then Jesse's your personal account where we actually saw that, and then Williams with your behavioral analysis, with your predictive analysis and behavioral profiling, what do you say about the susceptibility and concreteness of disability justice with this new artificial intelligence reality that is being pushed upon us?
So when it comes to artificial intelligence, there's this predominant narrative of its inevitability, right? This idea that, it's going to be here, we have to work with it. This fatalism about there's nothing we can do to resist it. There's also this lack of clarity around what people mean when they say the word. This is why, for those of you who are in the workshop, we talked about what is your definition of AI? And this is something that is deliberately undefined when it's being used as a sort of rhetorical device for achieving certain aims. But it's very important to be skeptical of this because they're going to use disability in particular as an excuse for why we need this stuff. They're going to say things like, but the disabled people need it for XYZ reason. And it's categorically untrue. But then there are these cases that make it confusing because we don't have a solid definition of AI. So we'll talk about auto captions and how useful they are. Auto captions are not in and of themselves AI. They are processing an input signal and converting it into letters that form words, right? If we are more accurate about that, is natural language processing, that is signal processing. And there are aspects of it that have been described as AI in the past does not mean that it has anything to share with generative AI. Okay, they're not the same thing. They will use excuses like, oh, we need generative AI to give us image descriptions so that blind people can navigate the world. This is one of my pet peeves. Because you're talking about a technology which will present information to someone that is categorically incapable of verifying it. So if the computer says this is a picture of an orange, you don't know if it's actually a picture of an apple because you literally can't see it. That's the point, right? And it is solving a problem without solving the problem, okay? This is techno-solutionism. The problem is lack of equity in information access and the way that we as a society actually are committed to providing multimodal information so that we're not relying on purely visual or purely auditory information, right? That solution is a community commitment. But instead we're gonna put this fabricated gloss of AI on top of it and say that we are doing this for disabled people, and that's why you should let it happen.
Yeah, I mean, my views on AI are potentially controversial. I'll caveat with that. Because as an entrepreneur who unfortunately had to downsize early last year and often has to downsize after every election, you know, I don't know that I would have survived this year without the support of AI systems, right? But at the same time, as Rua mentioned, it's about how do we use this technology responsibly, you know, with intent and as a tool, which is what it is. You know, in my opinion, and I've said this, you know, to others in the past, I think, you know, to answer your question, Ralisa, I think it's about, I think AI is going to force us to be more human, because in a lot of ways, I don't know, I was just telling someone, I hope my students aren't watching this. Sometimes when I ask my students questions on Zoom, the responses feel very auto-generated, and I'm like asking for unique perspectives, and I'm asking really personal and specific questions. And when I don't see a personal and specific response, I'm immediately suspicious that like this is just something, like I'll ask a question and it's almost like the response is like a restatement of my question. And that immediately sends up alarm bells, because I'm like, are you listening or are you just using ChatGPT? And I have no problem with them using ChatGPT. I even showed them how to cite ChatGPT in their papers. But my question is, there becomes this moment of, how can I connect with you in a way that is authentic, that I can make sure we're meeting each other where we are? So prove that they are anti-establishment. And to do that, they immediately share all of their crimes. They're like, I'm a thought criminal, I'm an adulterer, I've killed someone, and also like, so like, because I just confessed this to you, clearly I have something to lose. They say I'm already dead. So either believe me or like see that I'm willing to get shot here on the spot. And it backfires. Sorry for the spoiler. It's been out since the 50s. But but if there's this moment where like they have to be extremely vulnerable to prove their humanity. And I think that's what's going to end up happening as we continue to use AI and use disability justice values with intention. We're going to have to force people to see our humanity in a way that we haven't before. And I think in every moment like this, like the one we're seeing here in 2024, post November 5th, like there's always a counter movement. And I think some of the most beautiful art and movements and music have come out of these times of intense struggle. And I think a lot of humanity could come out of this. moment as well. I'm clearly an optimist.
You are. It's okay. I have something to say about ChatGPT, but I want to make sure Ashley doesn't have stuff to say first.
I'll let you go first.
Sweet. Okay, so I want to talk about ChatGPT use really because it has a deep entanglement with disability, actually. And so I want to talk about why we do see so much use of this tool by everyone, not just students, like everyone. And I want you, if you're somebody who uses this tool a lot, I want you to think about what is your motivation for it. Because I think that what I have seen in my students is that there is a seed of despair within you that tells you that you are not good enough and you are not smart enough, and therefore you need this machine to give you answers that make you sound smarter. And I see this especially with some of my international students who are not confident in English, and they have been convinced that this machine will give them better English, such that they are given more favor by their professors, which often do have a large amount of discrimination against our international students whose English is not solid. And so I have seen people turn to this tool, but the motivation for turning to it is often this kind of self-loathing. And that self-loathing is actually rooted in a fear of disability, a fear of cognitive deficiency, the idea that they're not good enough. And so I really want more people to think about that, because I think that once you start to recognize that some of that compulsion to turn to that tool is based on the idea of this very eugenic idea of trying to perform a certain amount of intelligence, that it is, you're not just draining the water table and hurting other people, you're hurting yourself.
That was deep.
If I can hate Sam Altman, by the way.
Damien has had his hand up. Are we allowed to have a Zoom person talk?
Zoom is next, yes.
Okay. I'm imagining it will be related to this question. Damien? Maybe.
Yep.
Oh, good.
It's actually related to a couple of the last two questions. So first of all, thank you all so much for being you and doing what you do. I really appreciate you as always. And then I wanted to kind of ask a little bit, if you could dig down on this intersection that we're talking about in terms of AI's entanglement with disability, but specifically in terms of the ways that disability gets co-opted for the production of AI. I'm thinking of some recent developments that have happened with different groups that have tried to mimic certain marginalized perspectives in the production of AI. And then if we could tie that in with this conversation that we were having about how disabled community functions in this space and how that's different from these ideas to try to extract disabled experience and extract the insights and the realities of disabled life to apply them in this techno-solutionist way. If you could just talk a little bit about how you understand those things fitting together.
Damien, are you remembering that article? I think you shared it, about that accessibility company that's using essentially a large language model to produce fake stories to help accessibility professionals understand how they help disabled people with their work. Am I hallucinating that?
That's the one.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one.
I mean, why? Why wouldn't you just talk to why would you need to talk to ChatGPT to understand disabled people when disabled people aren't dead yet?
Right.
Like, I'm just so thrown by their logic. And it's so insulting. Like, we would rather talk to ChatGPT than actually listen to disabled people. And this is a real project that an accessibility company, I think they're out of the UK, was like, oh, we'll help.
I thought it was Denmark or something.
Oh, yeah, maybe it was.
Yeah, so there's this company that is releasing basically a ChatGPT based platform for creating what we call in user experience design like personas. Okay, so this idea of like a archetypal disabled user that you can use as a foil for design questions. But
So I just want to make a whole bunch of noises and be angry. Yeah.
barf is one you could. So, and the thing about this is it's not just this one company. I have seen research papers trying to do this, like researchers who should fucking know better. Are trying to propose that they can use ChatGPT to simulate their participants. It's bad. It's bad. No. Okay. So first of all, even if you give it additional context and train it up real nice, it is mathematically impossible for these systems to accurately represent such a marginalized group of people. Blah. Gross. Okay, so, and then there's also just the fundamental grossness of like you have people who have lived expertise and should not just be consulted or included into design. They should be compensated for that knowledge. And we have disabled disability professionals who can't get work because y'all want to ask ChatGPT how to design something for it. It's just a symptom of you sucking, okay? So like that's, don't do it, it's bad. So, but I also, to go beyond just this small aspect, because Damien's question was more holistic, as they tend to be, sir, is if you can go back before ChatGPT's release, and if you might remember, is it Brett Lemoine? I know his last name is Lemoine, and was an employee at Google. And and he was working with Lambda, which was their large language model, and was beginning to be concerned that the model was sentient, right? I'm not interested right now in the question of whether or not these large language models are sentient, let alone whether or not they can reason. They fucking cannot reason. But the conversations arguing whether or not Lambda could be sentient were all directly related to the arguments about whether or not disabled people have personhood, right? And so you have this technology which is manifesting in the world and is actually drawing out of us conversations about how much we loathe disability and disabled people. And then you have this simultaneous use of this technology to pretend to be some sort of great benefit to disabled people, while also trying to replace them and their personhood within the design and development process, sort of the co-construction of our socio-technical world. We want to cut them out and ask the language model instead. It all comes back to a fundamental distaste and disdain for disability and disabled people. And until we, as a society and as a community, make a commitment to stop doing that, we will continue to manifest these gross uses out of these technologies that we keep making. Was that good, Damien? Is that what you wanted?
That was perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, buddy.
Sorry. We had a comment in the chat that I thought was a good one from Rick, who's pointing out that United Healthcare's use of artificial intelligence to deny claims for medical advantage policyholders led to the company using an algorithm that makes errors 90% of the time, which at that point, that's what you're intending to do, to mess with people and their health care so that they die before you have to pay to take care of them.
Yeah, so let's talk about this, because the focus is on United Healthcare right now, not just because their CEO was, I'm sorry, I can't stop laughing. He's literally murdered my friends, so it's funny to me. The CEO was recently unalived in the street, and murder's bad, okay, all right? The guy who got murdered killed a lot more people, but murder's bad. And also because if you look at the stats, they're disproportionately responsible for coverage denials, right? And that part of this is based on the like ProPublica and stat reporting that has gone into the details of this algorithm that they have used to do. But that protocol for denying claims existed both algorithmically and policy-wise and procedurally within these insurance companies before the application of this accelerated artificial intelligence, just means math, model, okay? So what you have is the behavior of these insurance companies has been progressing like this for decades, and they just added this mathematical aspect to it that made it go much faster, right? And so, like, we got to talk about this, but we have to remember that even if we took the algorithm away, the algorithm is still there, actually, okay? Just because just because there's not a particular software suite doing it. The insurance policies are designed to do this. They want to deny claims because they know you won't appeal, or that you don't know how to appeal, or it takes too long to appeal, because they're not in the business of providing health care and saving lives. They're in the business of making money, and the only way for an insurance company to do that is to cause death.
Literally the only good use for ChatGPT I've ever seen is when people use it to write response letters to insurance agency denials, to put them in the way that they like to see, to get that appeal like moved along more quickly. And it does, that part makes me giggle quite a bit. We have 3 other questions. Do you want to add on to this particular discussion, or should we send it back out to the room? Okay.
So much has been said. Go ahead.
Hey. Karish.
Hi. Is this working? My name is Karish. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Construction, and I work on construction robotics. A lot of work that we do with AI in construction is with regard to automation, and when it comes to code compliance checking, for example. And an example is ADA compliance, right? And I'm learning a lot from Ashley Shew that ADA standards, especially when it comes to the built environment, they are not enough or comprehensive. So I'm wondering, and my question for you is, with your expertise, what areas, when it comes to the built environment, needs improvement in terms of standards and written, because we use algorithms, but we also use data that is written in these policies and guidelines to automate our processes. With your expertise, what areas in the ADA guidelines, standards needs improvement, and if you want to rewrite it, what aspects would you look into? Thank you.
So this actually kind of comes back to this idea about rights versus justice. Okay, so rights-based frames, one of the problems with rights is that they don't exist until they've been violated, okay? There's no mechanism for dealing with a violation of your rights before it happens, right? It's a very punitive system, this idea that some kind of human rights violation happens, then there is a trial, then there is a consequence, right? And the ADA itself as a policy document lends itself to only kinds of procedural solutions, right? And procedural solutions then get implemented in very algorithmic ways, right? Because that's, you get a checklist and you tick the boxes. But what is a body, right? So if you have all these statistics is literally built on a bell curve. It's built on this idea that you have a population from which there should be culls. It's built on this idea that there is some kind of average, and that average is the only thing that you need to cater to. Nobody actually lives at the peak of a bell curve. There's nothing there, right? There's a famous example of military cockpit design, right? Where they took all of these measurements of pilots, and they figure, okay, what's the average spine length? What's the average length of a femur? Like, they did all of this math to get like the perfect cockpit. None of those pilots fit in the cockpit. Because there's no such thing as an average body. That doesn't mean we can't have policies and procedures. I mean, at scale, you can't build a building without something, right? But if you want to actually evaluate the effectiveness of that building, you have to put bodies in it. And they can't be simulated algorithmically averaged bodies. You have to put real human bodies in there and get them to tell you, I actually would not like to go by the dumpster in order to get inside the building. Or, other things about you technically designed this bathroom to meet the ADA standards, but there's actually some specific logistics that the standards didn't capture. And you've made a manifestation of an ADA compliant bathroom that I can't sit in. Mm-hmm. You gotta put bodies in it. And you gotta ask those bodies, those human beings, what they think, feel, need. There's not a checkbox answer to any of these things. And that means math can't save us from any of it either.
Well, and math makes things materially worse for some people, right? Like it's not, and I, not to blame math, but indeed, I think about the ways in which my life is made harder by having an unusual body. And I don't just mean this in some chairs are uncomfortable. Like that's true for everyone. Everyone has sat on an uncomfortable chair, I'm sure. But for me to go and do things in the world, when I go through airport security, they send me through a particular line, and then they put me off to the side, and then they swab me down for residue from bomb making because I have set off all of their alarms by having a prosthetic leg. And I'm lucky that my body's normative enough and my prosthesis doesn't go up so high that they have to get in my funky junk. Real term there. Indeed, it's a leg. It's a little bit less invasive than some of my friends who wear ostomy bags, than some of my friends who have metal parts that they can't show off or take off. That these things are actually matter to my movement through different places, how I am tracked by governmental authorities, just to bring this back, in fact, to our conversation about the next 5 years. And what a new regime will look like in terms of safety for people who are always given extra scrutiny. Mm-hmm. So this is true of, people who are poorly or too much recognized by facial recognition. I think about the ways in which, false positives are higher among Black people's faces for facial recognition. So you're more likely to be pulled out if you have darker skin and given more scrutiny. This is true for disabled people, sort of writ large. If your behaviors look different, right? If you're fidgeting in particular ways, you are in a surveillance state, very much watched. And this can be sometimes not even intentional. When I think about building design and where I stand out and the sort of the procedures I'm going through to get into a building or to get into a restroom or, to get food, sort of some of our basic life functions that we'll need to do, it is exhausting. And it requires extra work on the part of people with non-normative bodies or non-planned for or mathematically fitting in particular ways. And it's extra time and work and energy through it all the time. And I think that's one thing that's really hard to impress upon non-disabled people sometimes. Mm-hmm. That isn't just I'm annoyed about one thing. It's every step of this is harder for me. And it's not actually my fault that it's harder. I haven't made it harder just by existing, right? It's that people take me as problematic. And I'm problematic in a whole lot of other ways. But it's not particularly my embodiment that I think should be a problem when I enter spaces, when I try to use the restroom in a perfectly built space, when I'm just trying to do the things everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I'll end by saying, there's this cartoon. I wish I had the illustrator top of mind, but there's this cartoon that I know a lot of us refer to in the disability space where it shows a group of kids standing in front of a school building, and a man is shoveling the stairs so that the kids can get in, and there is someone in a wheelchair right next to the kids saying, hey, can you shovel the ramp? And the person shoveling says, yeah, after I shovel the stairs. And the person in the wheelchair says, if you shovel the ramp, we all can get in. We don't have to do one before the other. And so, a couple things in relation to what you're saying. We talked a lot about accessibility today. Accessibility is not actually written into the ADA. The World Wide Web Consortium, who wrote the accessibility guidelines, came a couple years after the ADA. So a lot of the wins we're seeing around the ADA, by the way, if you're looking for a hobby, look up inaccessible websites, because people are making a lot of money every year. I actually track. Beyonce has been sued, Domino's has been sued, Netflix has been sued. These folks are having nice lives, okay? So if you ever see anything that does not have alt text, feel free to look into how to report it. But yeah, I'd love to see it updated with accessibility guidance so that we can have more meat there, because so much of where we see the ADA coming into question is with regard to accessibility online. And the final thing I think about is, working on all of these different political campaigns. One of my favorite accessibility practices was when, I'll share, I worked with Elizabeth Warren's team in Texas, and when we would look at a space for the campaign office for the various satellite sites, not only did we have a checklist of ADA regulations that we were looking at, we actually brought a disabled person, and to say it as frankly as I can, the most disabled person on the team to come with us to tour. So if this person used a wheelchair, if this person, by the way, they were paid to do this, and we asked them to navigate and to give us their feedback on the space. And this was anytime we toured a building. So not only did we have the checklist, we also had a personal, feedback as to whether or not this space would work. And again, with regard to the steps and the ramp analogy, if the space worked for that person who was multiply disabled, it often worked for everyone, okay? There were multiple things. It was well lit, the bathrooms were big enough for everyone, there was room for folks to spread out, just in the same way that video captions work well for deaf and hard of hearing people, and they also work well if you cannot watch a video without captions anymore like me. So, it just accessibility makes things better for everyone. And so I'd like to see, as Rua and Ashley have mentioned, more of a human touch, at least to start. Like, have your model be based on actual human experiences as opposed to just trying to use math to get to your answer.
They seem to really not want to talk to disabled people in so many of these spaces in a way that just boggles my mind.
We had a 4-hour road trip up here, and we were talking about the loneliness epidemic that's happening. I'm like, why can't we just ask questions from one another?
We have 2 more questions, and one is on Zoom, one is in the room. So you ask both to ask the questions, and then you can answer together.
Hi, I'm Dong-hoon, a visiting scholar in STS department, and thank you for sharing your thoughts today. I'm interested in the problem that current technology, including AI technology, makes people less talkative and active these days, because I believe that it seems like the technology is saying to us that stay here, wait, and the technology will get this. So I think this problem engenders another problem that I call it the over-reliance on AI technology, and I believe that it deeply relates to our politics, democracy, because this technology suggests us that it can enhance your people's ability, for example, to make better decisions in our politics. But honestly, I don't buy that, because I believe that our democracy needs more than that. Not just making a good decision. It's a very small part of our democracy. So I want to ask your opinions that. What do you think what features of technology, including AI technology, makes people, especially disabled people, less active in our society? Yeah, that's my question.
There was a second one, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Are you going to read the Zoom question? Oh, you did.
Cora Olsen on Zoom would like to hear your hot takes on AI use, specifically large language models and diagnostics.
Oh, God. Okay. All right. So that one's easier for me to be mad about, but to talk about. Anyway, so when we think about technology as a whole as this sort of like socially isolating phenomenon. I think a lot about like the concerns around screen time and children. There's two things I want people to think about. One is that there's this tendency to be afraid of screen time in children because there's been this concerted effort to tie it to creating disability. This idea that like if you let your kid watch a tablet too much, they'll become ADHD. Anyway, and but then also like, okay, you're looking at the technology as if it is an attracting force to some kind of condition that you don't want, and you're not looking at the environment and that may be pushing people towards technology, right? So like you literally go outside and we have, you know, streets that are not made for pedestrians and not made for play and not made for people to exist on. We have an outside that is not the same as it was, right? And we could go off for a minute about how we had a functioning public transit system within living memory. And like GE, General Motors convinced us that we didn't, and we've all forgotten. It's very annoying. Anyway, but so technology is not inherently a force for isolation. And in fact, for many disabled people, it is one of the only sources of connection. Because we have been isolated by the external society that wants to keep us in literal back rooms, and we connect to each other via the internet. So there's that. To move a little bit to this question of artificial intelligence and diagnostics, there's a very good piece by Oz Keys. What is the title of it? Do you remember? Automating Autism.
Yeah.
And this was before ChatGPT, but it talked about like the algorithmic approaches to diagnosis and detection of autism. You can't build an algorithm for doing diagnostics without relying on the prior clinical data, and the prior clinical data is itself full of bias and historical motivations and is absolute trash. So no, it's not going to help do anything. Also, I don't necessarily want to be automatically registered on the mutant registry, actually. So what happens is you delegate the responsibility for the appropriate diagnosis and treatment of somebody to a machine, and then that way you're no longer responsible for when it got it wrong. In particular, you're no longer responsible for when it missed someone. And that's actually a large part of our motivation for creating and using these systems, is the idea of abdicating our responsibilities to something that we have been convinced or that we believe is somehow better than us, is more objective, is more accurate. We tell ourselves these lies about these mathematical systems that they're better than us, right? That comes back to my earlier comment about why are people using ChatGPT, is because they believe that it can be better than them. We're doing it because we don't want to be responsible for the complexity of living in a society and actually being in community with people that need us. That's all I got.
Can I see the question again?
Oh, yeah. So Dong Hoon's was, what features of technology, including AI, make disabled people less active in our society?
Yeah.
And then Cora was asking for our hot takes on diagnostic AI, and Rua got both of those in the answer. Wow.
I mean, I have to call out the ridiculousness of being, quote unquote, the most advanced democracy in the world, and having to stand for over an hour to cast a vote in this country, like as a normal experience, right? When I went to go vote this year, I went on the first day of early voting, and as I was standing there, you know, in the heat for over an hour, I was surrounded by people who were elderly. I believe they decided to just sit the ambulance like in the parking lot because people were dropping like flies to try and cast a vote. And this was in a predominantly white suburban area. So you can only imagine, like in the places with less access, what was happening there. And, you know, when I think about the voting technology that we're using, and like the physical bubbling and the lack of just the lack of access to actually practice our democracy, and how it's getting worse based on the laws that are being passed every single day across the country to make it even harder to vote. The number of people I saw walk out of the voting booth because they forgot, I'm in North Carolina, they forgot their ID, and they've got to go home and then come back to the 90-minute line with their ID. Like, listen, when I think about getting people to the polls, I try to think about people like my younger brother who, didn't vote in 2016 because he had to go to the gym, and he was like, if I wait in this line, like I'm not going to get to go. Like, that's like the average person. I'm not the average person. I've worked on multiple campaigns. I went to a democracy camp in middle school. Like, I'm like, let me remember that I am not talking to people like me, to tell someone who is on the fence about voting, or like to try and convince someone who already doesn't believe that their vote's going to count, to wait in a 2-hour line to do this thing that is happening at the same time that AI is like, changing the world, is just, it's something that needs to be said in this conversation, whether it's super relevant to the question or not. So that's all I got.
No, I really, really appreciate this discussion so much, and what you guys have had to share with us all this afternoon. After we hit about 75 minutes in, I do have chemo brain, and I won't make answers that sound better at some point. So I am just going to leave it at the thanking you, and thanking all of our audience members, thanking the library for hosting some of the amazing AV here, and Fernanda, Christine, and Lois for helping set us all up. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all for this amazing panel. I also would like to thank again for the production of this room, because to make an accessible event is truly hard. We are learning with that, and we hope it gets easier and easier as we go. I will pass the word to Chris. What we are going to do now, we have 30 minutes for us to hang out here in the room. So feel free to connect with the speakers and among ourselves, of course. This is the end of the semester. We are also going to see each other at 5:30 p.m. at Rising Silo, where there is a jazz band, and we will hang out as well. But now I pass to Chris for her to select